We're all set.
All right, good evening. This is the Village of Menands Board of Trustees semi-monthly meeting. I am Mayor Meg Grenier, and as it is 6 o'clock, I will call this meeting to order. For anyone outside the village staff who is attending this video conference, I would ask that you please identify yourselves.
Mike and Susan McKay.
Eric Johnson.
Rebecca Tenhagen.
Sorry, go ahead.
All right, Rebecca Tenhagen, Cornell.
Bill Nevin says he was
Eric
here, but I
Johnson
didn't hear him. I just
Jason.
saw his mouth moving. A lot of static here. All right, so if everybody could mute their microphones, that would be helpful because there's static in the system. I now do a roll call of village staff. Deputy Mayor Eileen Nickel.
Present.
Trustee Seth Harris.
Present.
Trustee Brian Marsh.
Present.
Trustee Diane Foley. Yeah, I know she's there. Clerk Don Hanrahan.
Present.
Village Attorney Steve Rafus.
Present.
On the behalf of the village board, I would ask all residents that we please keep our first responders, all essential workers, and those affected by this pandemic in our thoughts and prayers. Pursuant to Governor Cuomo's executive order number 202.1 issued on March 13, 2020, suspending Article 7 of the Public Officers Law to the extent necessary to permit any public body to meet and take such actions authorized by law that allowed the public to not be physically present at the meeting, but allow the public to listen to or view such meetings via teleconference call or video conference, while recording and later transcribing of the meeting. Village of Menands Board of Trustees semi-monthly meeting is being held via Google Meets video conference to protect public safety and welfare during this COVID-19 pandemic. In an effort to conduct this meeting effectively, we ask those in attendance to please mute your microphones during the meeting. As we are conducting only essential business during tonight's meeting, there will be no public comment. Any comments previously submitted to Clerk Hanrahan prior to the meeting and deemed essential will be read into the record. We need a motion to approve.
Meg,
Sorry.
Meg, real quick, there was a backlog of people trying to get into the meeting that I was admitting before. So I don't know for the minutes if you want the people who've just been admitted to announce themselves real quick.
Okay. Don, you ready?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Seth, whoever didn't.
Yep. If you just entered the meeting and you haven't yet announced yourself, please quickly unmute yourself and announce yourself for the minutes.
Megan Fontaine, one of the our interns.
Rodina Lee. Rodina Lee.
Thank you.
West
Cornell.
Porter. Also Cornell.
Seth, is that it?
I think I got
I
everybody.
believe so. Yep.
Okay.
Don, if you need to, obviously all the names are on the right. If someone, they were all anxious to announce themselves at the same time.
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
Good.
And just to make note that the governor did extend his executive order this time through October 4th. Seems to be doing it on a month-to-month basis, but this is why we're here via Google Meets again tonight. All right, so we need a motion to accept the August 17th board meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of the August 17th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
This is
Seth
Diane.
Harris.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Don, you want to do the vouchers and payroll?
Yeah. Warrant number 7, general, $107,901.64. Water, $2,216.44. Sewer, $2,881.18, totaling $112,999.26. Payroll number 7, $102,508.57.
So moved.
Second, Eileen.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You want me to read the transfers, or are you good?
I'm good. We got several transfers. Court miscellaneous to court equipment for $700. The contingency account, $28,715. To clerk consultant, $3,715. Law contractual equipment expense, $15,000. Compensated expense or absences, $5,000. Police equipment and miscellaneous, $5,000. Building equipment, $434. To insurance for $434. Fire miscellaneous, $400. To communication repairs for $400. Park miscellaneous, $88. To park insurance, $88. Contingency account, $500. To equipment miscellaneous, $500. Chlorine and CO2, $250. To chlorine for testing, $250. And those are
So
your trans-
moved. This is Diane.
Second, Seth Harris.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We have two water adjustments to correct. The first one is for 12 Wolford. We made an adjustment last meeting for November through May for the water. The meter was the wrong size, but the meter was actually installed a year ago, so we should have done both periods. The minimum should have been charged at $297.91, but was charged $1,185.66. So he's due a refund of $795.70. Do you want to make a motion?
So moved.
Second, Eileen.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
64 Amsterdam Avenue had a faulty meter reading. The meter was replaced, and while they were doing it was discovered that the outside reader was also needed to be replaced. The resident paid $1,028.14 when he should have paid $297.91. So he's due a refund of $730.23.
So moved, Seth Harris.
Second.
Diane.
Don, just to make note of our minutes from today, the two numbers are off, so make sure you keep an eye on that. But all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? One says 730, the other says 795, so make sure you're.
I'll double check the numbers, but Bill was throwing numbers at me right and left today. It should have, oh wait, you're right. It should be 730.23.
Okay. And did you get the motions?
Yes, Harris and Marsh on that one, and Marsh and Nickel on the first one. The treasurer is requesting a resolution to transfer $38,000 from equipment savings to pay for the new pickup truck that was approved on March 16, 2020.
So moved, Eileen.
Second, Seth Harris.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
The treasurer is requesting resolutions to correct the wording to two budget transfers approved in July 20th meeting and a budget transfer at the August 17th meeting. The corrected resolution to transfer $22,000 from sewer fund unappropriate should read transfer to sewer savings to sewer cash. Correct the resolution to transfer $222,450 from equipment savings to miscellaneous to read from equipment savings to general cash fund. And to correct the wording on a budget transferred on 8/17 to correct the transfer of $21,400 from equipment savings to fire department equipment miscellaneous transfer to equipment savings account, general cash fund.
So moved. Brian.
Second, Eileen.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
The treasurer is requesting a resolution to amend the budget as follows: to increase the account fire miscellaneous equipment by $400 to account for the mobile radios that were approved last year. To increase the account for street equipment by $258,450 to account for the new garbage truck and pickup truck that was approved last year, and to increase contractual equipment account for work that was done at 21 Lewis Ave.
Hey, Don, I just want to clarify that the amount of the increase is $21,400.
Yes, 21,000. Yeah,
Okay.
I need a motion.
So moved. So moved. Eileen.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
With the purchase of the new pickup truck, we're going to surplus the 2004 GMC pickup truck. So I needed permission to declare it a surplus so that we can put it in the paper to be advertised for sale.
I move to declare the 2004 GMC pickup truck surplus.
Second, this is Diane.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Is that the one with the wooden tail end? Okay.
Yes.
I'm looking for a new car. I'll have to look for that.
You don't want that one. We have to do a resolution regarding the standard workday and reporting resolution for elected and appointed officials. Someone want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Don, you've been doing such a great job.
No, Seth, this has got your name written all over it.
It's too short. It's too short for Seth.
They're right. I read resolutions 5 pages and longer.
You and Brian.
Yeah.
All right, be it resolved that the Village of Menands, number 40123, hereby establish the following standard workdays for these titles and will report the officials to the New York State and local retirement based on their record of activities. Mary Grenier, Mayor; Diane Foley, Trustee; Eileen Nickel, Trustee; Bob Besher, Associate Justice; Stephen Rafis, Village Attorney; Lyle Darmeco, Code Enforcement Officer; Brian Marsh, Trustee.
We'll continue.
Oh, Christopher Flint, Justice.
So
We
moved.
need a motion. Yeah, second. Brian?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Mike, can you unmute your thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. On September 1st, 2020 business meeting, the Menands Fire Company number 1 has elected to active membership Nicholas.
Calabretus.
Okay. They were asking to have him approved for active membership.
He did get the background checks as required. So anything you wanted to add, Mike?
No, we're just really excited to have him. He actually stopped down one night and saw something on Facebook about a fire call. Must have been at the apartment, and wanted to become a member. So because he's a student in Hudson Valley, and he's excited to get started.
So I can tell you, I will gladly make a motion to have you guys have Nicholas Calagridis for the fire department. I've known him since he was 3 years old, and he's a good kid. And he was probably here that night that the fire was going down the road. So
Right.
you got
And Eileen, I will allow you to refer to his last name every time I need you to.
It's easy. Genetics.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So.
Next one is the police reform resolution.
We have a resolution creating the Village of Menands Comprehensive Police Practices Review Order number 203 and appointing the members thereto. Whereas each local government has a responsibility to ensure that all of its citizens are treated equally, fairly, and justly before the law. And whereas Executive Order 203 requires each local government entity, which has a police agency operating with police officers as defined under 1.20 of the Criminal Procedure Law, must perform a comprehensive review of current police force deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices, and develop a plan to improve such deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices for the purposes of addressing the particular needs of the community served by such police agency and promote community engagement to foster trust, fairness, and legitimacy, and to address any racial bias and disproportionate policing of communities of color. And whereas Executive Order 203 requires each chief executive of such local government to convene the head of the local police agency and stakeholders in the community to develop such plan, which shall consider evidence-based policing strategies, included but not limited to use of force policies, procedural justice, any studies addressing systemic racial bias or racial justice in policing, implicit bias awareness training, de-escalation training and practices, law enforcement assisted diversion programs, restorative justice practices, community-based outreach and conflict resolution, problem-oriented policing, hotspots policing, focused deterrence, crime prevention through environmental design, violence prevention and reduction interventions, model policies and guidelines promulgated by the New York State Municipal Police Training Council, and standards promulgated by the New York State Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. Therefore, be it resolved that there be and hereby is created in the Village of Menands the Comprehensive Police Practices Review Committee, whose duty shall be to comply with each and every term and condition of the Executive Order 203 for 2020. And be it resolved that the following individuals be and hereby are appointed to said committee. Mayor Megan Grenier, co-chair. Menands Police Chief Frank Lacoste, co-chair. Eileen Nickel, Deputy Mayor and Albany County DCYF. Ryan St. Gelace, Lieutenant of the Menands Police and former PBA member. Michael Majuli, resident and Town of Colony attorney. Melissa Jeffers, resident, Town of Colony board member and former immigration staff. Lisa Bonacani, resident, founder of Empower Ethiopia. Stephen Herrick, Albany County Public Defender's Office. David Soares, Albany County DA. Renee Merges, Albany County ADA. Dr. Maureen Long, Superintendent, Menands School. Jennifer Canavo, Principal, Menands School. Sean Gomes, resident, former village employee. Ray Perez Pearson, resident, former military police. Madeline Royal, resident, PTA president, and Peter Kelsey, program director of Father Peter Young Housing. Be it further resolved that the village attorney, Stephen Rafus, be and hereby is appointed as counsel to the said committee.
So moved.
Second, Seth Harris.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so just to let you know that there's a lot of different variations of people in there, and those are required by the governor's order, which is why.
It's a good list.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid committee.
Don, you ready for the chlorine pump?
You're muted, Ron.
Sorry about that. We have two chlorine pumps at the main pump station that have been there for approximately 20 years, and they're both starting to wear out and they need to be replaced. So we Sean Connors got quotes for three. The first one's from JEM for $6,736.04. Clean Waters, $7,484. MJR, $7,860.93. Bill says there's money in the budget for this, and then the pumps need to be replaced.
Are any of these the current vendor?
Our current vendor doesn't. We don't have like a vendor that handles this. This is who the our water consultant. You know,
Did Sean recommend one versus the other?
you broke up, right?
I'm sorry, somebody tried to call me. I'm just wondering if he had a recommendation.
He said the JEM.
And how much was JEM?
$6,736.04.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve JEM to replace the two chlorine pumps.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Don, did you send Renee the resolution that I just read about the committee in advance?
Yeah, I gave her everything. Everything you got. She's,
Okay, thanks.
the fire department's requesting permission to send a piece of apparatus and men to Ron Baker's wake and funeral on Friday and Saturday. For those of you who don't know who Ron Baker was, he was a fire instructor. He was also a teacher at one point at Shaker High School, but he was also the deputy chief of Colony EMS when they formed, and he was there until he retired. He's also been a volunteer fireman his whole life for Colony Village Fire Department. So they were requesting, every department in the town is going to be represented. And they asked if they could be represented also. So they needed permission to use the truck and the men to go to it.
Okay, I'll make a motion to allow the fire department to use our truck to attend the funeral of Ron Baker.
Second, this is Diane.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And our condolences to all the fire departments and his family throughout the town.
And the last thing I have is we received the 5-year plan, consolidated plan block grant. Wait a minute. Is that right? The 5-year the Colony Community Development 5-year consolidated block grant will be on file in the office.
Is Bill Nevins still on the call?
Yes, he is.
He wanted to mention something about the census. Hi, Bill. Did you want to mention something about the census? You're not on mute, but we can't hear you.
His microphone. Still, no. No. Do you know sign language?
Bill,
he was going to, Don, whatever you know, you can go ahead.
He's saying Don Handahan is a great guy.
Yeah. Over the past 2 weeks, there's been a mailing sent out from the census to try to get more people to sign up for the census. We also put out lawn signs. There's some banners that you'll see throughout the village. There were some up on Lorenzo Boulevard, on Broadway, on the firehouse, and we also did around all the apartment complexes. We put many signs there. Village One asked if we didn't put lawn signs up, but they asked if we could have signs for them. So they put signs up on every building at Village One. So we're pretty covered. Then we're going to be sending out a postcard to still remind people as a second reminder.
And this money,
I think that's everything Bill wanted me to say.
This was paid for from a grant that the school had received to do with postage and getting the signs whatsoever. So it was a good effort on the school's part to get that money so that this push can take place.
Nice.
All right, and Bill had also submitted a comment before the meeting. He would like to thank the Menands Village DPW. They are always willing to help. They are hardworking, the village looking nice. Their hard work is evident in the new honors flags hung up and down the Broadway corridor. They look great, and they do look great. I think we're over 40 now, and Diane, thank you for your efforts to that. It's been a great project, and people have really jumped on board with it, and the banners do look great. Additionally, he would like to thank the Menands Police Department. Their help with a family emergency a few weeks ago shows their dedication to the police profession. He was met with calm, professional, knowledgeable officers who helped with the crisis. It is clear that this level of professionalism comes from the top down, and I want to personally thank Chief Lacoste for his leadership of the Menands Police Department. Thank you, Bill Nevins.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Nice. Thank you, Bill. You don't always hear the good. You normally only hear from people when they have have an issue. So thank you for bringing those up and commending the departments that deserve it.
All right. Does anybody have anything else before we turn it over to the interns? No? All right.
Nope.
Brian and Seth, you can flip a coin. Who's ever going first?
Sure. I'll just start and introduce the program, and we'll go from there. So for the past few meetings, I know that the residents and the board have heard from our interns, but I just want to give everyone an update if this is your first time at one of our meetings. The beginning of the summer, back in June, Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations offered a summer credit research internship for students who might have otherwise had a job or an internship and otherwise now wouldn't be able to do it due to COVID. So when they put out a call looking for internships for these students, I brought it up to the board that it would be great to have some interns look at best practices in local government, look at budgets from other municipalities, and look at how places do things, because oftentimes we have to make decisions and we don't have a lot of time to do that and to do a lot of research. So it's always good to find these things out and see where the village of Menands falls. So Brian Marsh and I interviewed a number of interns and potential interns, I should say, and we ended up with 4 of the very best who I know, I hate to speak for anyone else, but Brian and I truly enjoyed working with our interns. They all not only put in a lot of hard work, but I think they learned a lot about local government, and really they met us halfway. We wanted to provide them with a great opportunity this summer so that they could appreciate what local government does for its residents, but they took the project and ran with it and truly became invested in it. So tonight is really their opportunity to not only present their research and recommendations, but to show us all that they did in the research. And I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I know that we're very much looking forward to hearing from them. So in just speaking with some of the interns ahead of time, what I just wanted to do, I wanted to start with Megan and Rebecca, and then if Brian wants to say a few words after that, before Wes and Natalie speak, then we can do that. If then at the end, if anyone has any questions for the interns, they'll open it up to that. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask them at that point. So we'll start with Megan and Rebecca, whichever one wants to go first.
Yes, so let me share my screen. All right. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yep, you can see
All
it.
right. So my name is Rebecca Tenhagen. I'm currently a sophomore at Cornell University studying industrial and labor relations with a minor in economics. So thank you, Mayor Grenier, for the floor. I spent this summer studying the village of Menands and researching other municipalities in New York State with the goal of exploring best practices which may be beneficial for the village of Menands to implement. I specifically focused on matters of interest to the village board, the village treasurer, the fire department, and the historian. So unfortunately, I do not have time in the presentation to go through all of the things that the village of Menands does spectacularly, but the areas of focus in this presentation are specific areas in which the village can improve based on comparative research conducted with a random sample. When making calls, many municipalities were extremely impressed by this initiative by the village and are interested in doing some sort of similar research project to get some insight into best practices as well. So the following slides summarize the questions I researched, broken down into categories based on departments And the questions listed in teal will be addressed in this presentation, but all of them are addressed in detail in my full report. So these are the questions regarding to the village board, looking at access to information and shared services, and then questions for the treasurer, including questions about fund balance management and interest revenue. For the fire department, revolving around membership and funding, and the historian revolving around funding as well. So the method to collect data, I chose a stratified random sample of 31 villages using region of New York State as the strata. This ensured that villages across the state would be represented proportionally. In addition to these 31 villages, I also researched 7 additional municipalities, which I handpicked for specific reasons, such as a similarity to Menands, or because the municipality exhibited good practices in a particular department. So neither these municipalities nor Menands are taken into account in the regressions or other statistical calculations. Only the randomly selected villages used were considered. So now I will summarize my findings. First, looking at the ease of access to information, I had mixed luck in obtaining budget reports from municipalities' websites. Of the 31 randomly selected villages, 27 had a website. So this interval on the bottom is a confidence interval at the 90% level of the true proportion of villages in New York State which have a website. It's a smaller proportion than one might expect, somewhere in between 86.7% and 87.5%. And then on those websites, some were a lot more detailed and helpful than others. So we're 90% confident the true interval of villages that have their website or their budget on their website. So this is taken from the villages that did have a website, where the confidence interval is within 69.8% and 71%. So the second question, of course, Menands both has a easy to use website and has the budget documents on the website. So it is definitely better than a lot of villages in the state. So the second research question is looking at shared services. So I called each of my randomly selected villages to ask the clerk about the services the village shared with its town. There were some cases where after 3 or more phone calls, the village did not respond. So the data is representative of 22 of the 31 randomly selected villages. This bar chart shows all of the services villages reported to share with another municipality. The most common responses were equipment. So 41% or 9 of the 22 villages responded that they shared equipment with their town. Informal shared services, where the village and town will help each other out on an as-needed basis. And that was reported by 36% or 8 of the 22 villages, although I do suspect that number is higher and probably closer to even 100%, and just it might not come to mind as a response to shared services. And additionally, fire departments and street maintenance were both reported to be shared between the town and village by 27% or 6 of the 22 villages. So Megan and I both had a call with Mayor Blaise of Lake George, and we specifically talked about shared services. Mayor Blaise was proud to say that the town and village of Lake George share so many services. So between the town and village, the only duplication is the separate departments of public works. The municipality's shared services arrangements save taxpayers jointly about $750,000. This degree of cooperation has not always existed between the village and the town. When Blaise became mayor almost 50 years ago, there was strong feelings of pride in each municipality and animosity towards the other. Blaise truly believes that the town and village now have the ideal working relationship. More recently, under pressure from the state, there have been 2 separate votes to dissolve the village, but both failed with wide margins, proving that despite sharing most services, the village stays relevant. So now moving on to financial data. First, looking at fiscal stress as reported by the state comptroller's office. So on a scale from 0 to 100, with 100 as the most concerning score, Menands' fiscal stress score is 12.9, which is well within the no designation category. Menands in teal here lies in about the middle of the data collected in my random sample. So now looking at fund balance management, this first chart shows that the comparative fund balances for the randomly selected villages and how much money they appropriated from reserves to their 2020 and 2021 budgets. So Menands falls below the $2.8 million average fund balance, and it is again shown in these teal colors on the end. So this chart shows the percent of the fund balance that was appropriated in the 2020-2021 budget, with the exception of Sackett's Harbor, which is right here, in which there was a reporting error where the comptroller's office reported a smaller fund balance than the village reported appropriating to its general funds. With that exception, Menands did appropriate the highest percent of its fund balance to its 2020-2021 budget. So this is a chart of the ratio of fund balance to general fund appropriations. And this illustrates that in comparison to general fund appropriations, Menands' fund balance is low than a lot of the other municipalities, certainly not the lowest. And finally, with fund balance management, I was interested in seeing if there was a direct correlation between fund balance and general fund appropriations. And I was surprised to find that while there is a strong correlation between the two variables, it is actually a quadratic relationship. And so the fund balance regression line does account for 88.5% of the variability in the data. So this is a very good regression, but it's very interesting that it is quadratic. And of course, Menands in teal, it does fall very close to the regression line. So Menands' fund balance can pretty closely predict its general fund appropriations. So moving on to interest revenue, which is the budget item under revenue under use of money and property. Specifically, I looked at first interest income and interest revenue, and then I also looked at the more general use of money and property. So this first chart shows that aside from a few outliers, primarily in Westchester and Long Island, interest income is not a significant source of revenue for villages. And this is a closer look at that graph so that you can see more detail with Menands, which the interest revenue was about $350 in 2018 to 2019. So it is lower than many of the other municipalities, but again, not the lowest. So this chart shows a similar trend, but takes into account all use of money and property income and not just interest income. So that also, of course, includes renting government properties, etc. And again, here's a closer look at these values. And Menands is rather low on this measure. So here, this is the use of money and property as a percent of the total revenue in 2018-2019. And for most municipalities, the use of money and property is not a significant source of revenue. It is not a particularly important part of their general fund revenues, but it is especially low in Menands. So this is under 1%. So you can see that it is a very, very small value. So next, looking at the fire department and the fire company, certainly fire company membership is a large issue facing the village. And so I looked at membership in other departments across the state. So in this graph, these mid-tone blue bars represent villages serviced by fire departments that service at least one other municipality. So the borders of the fire protection district and the village are not coterminous. There's the fire department services more than one village. It might be the town and the village, etc. The navy bars represent villages that are serviced by a fire department that exclusively services the village, and the borders are coterminous. The light blue bars represent villages which are serviced by more than one fire department. And as always, Menands is here in teal. So it is difficult to compare numbers like this because the way that different fire departments are organized and set up based on geography, etc., because it varies so much across these villages. But in the next two slides, I tried to compare the numbers in terms of volunteers per capita and volunteers per square mile in the village. So adjusted for village population, the graph looks much different. It is important to note that the villages that have the highest volunteers per village resident are in departments which service more than just the one village. So the number isn't exactly accurate for how many volunteers per person because it includes other people not calculated in this measure. That said, Menands is low even in comparison to the villages that have their own fire departments, which again would be the navy bars. And here, this is accounting for area of the village. So Menands does have the fewest volunteers per square mile of the villages sampled. So the two largest number of members are in departments that service other municipalities. So again, that same error is present here, but departments that only service the village, so those navy bars, are still relatively high, especially taking those two outliers out. So the other fire chiefs I talked to also acknowledged that membership was a serious problem for the department, and specifically, Sackett's Harbor uses an incentive system to promote membership, where members gain points, which can be redeemed for different rewards. And the Village of Colony's fire department has a very close working relationship with the village's DPW, where 3 employees of the DPW are full-time firefighters salaried by the village. So Menands Fire Department is extremely ingrained in the Menands community, and this was another way that other fire chiefs cited as a way to boost membership, and so Menands is definitely doing a good job in that regard. And looking at fire department funding, the 2020-2021 fire appropriations of $102,950 for Menands is much lower than the average appropriations, which were about $258,000. However, the data is extremely skewed to the right, so the median value of fire department appropriations is about $88,000, which is smaller than Menands appropriations. So the same type of pattern is depicted when adjusted for total appropriations. So this is percent of general fund appropriations devoted to fire. So Menands appropriated 1.49% of its general fund budget in 2020-2021 to the fire department, and it does fall below center by both counts here. The data has a mean of 6.9% and a median of 3.19%. I was curious to see if there was a noted correlation between fire appropriations and population, village area, or median income, or between percent of the budget appropriated towards fire and population, village area, or median income. Of the 3 independent variables, median income was the best predictor of fire appropriations, both in terms of absolute appropriations and the percent of total appropriations. And of all the mentioned regressions, which can all be found graphed, detailed in my report, but the median income and percent of budget appropriated to fire had the highest constant of determination. That said, none of these independent variables were particularly accurate predictors of fire appropriations. As you can see, the R-squared value here is only 0.325, which is not a high correlation between the two variables. I chose these three variables as I felt they acted both as factors in a village's tax base that could also have an influence on the amount of fire protection necessary. Of course, of those three, median income seems to be the least likely to have an impact on the need for fire protection, yet according to the data, it had the highest correlation coefficient. So finally, looking at the historian, I wanted to look at funding for historians across the state. So this table shows the 5-number summary statistics for historian budgets of the 13 villages that had appropriated any money to the historian. The average historian budget was $1,082, meaning the data has a strong right skew. Menands, as you can see, falls very close to the maximum value for historian appropriations. And again, Menands was not included in the calculations for this, but just included on the slide for reference. So this table is the corresponding data adjusted for total appropriations. So the percent of general fund appropriations that went to the historian. As a note, the 0% minimum corresponds to the $100 minimum on the previous slide, but that was smaller than 1/100% of the village's general fund appropriations. So the average percentage of general fund appropriations that went to the historian was 0.09%. And we are 90% confident the true proportion of villages in New York State which even appropriate money for historians is within the interval 53.5% to 54.8%. And we're 90% confident the mean of village appropriations for historians in New York State is within the interval between $695 and $890. And finally, we are 90% confident that the mean percent of total village spending appropriated to historians in New York State is within the interval between 0.04% and 0.06%. So finally, how many municipalities historians are salaried? So we are 90% confident the true proportion of villages in New York State which have salaried historians is within the interval 12% to 12.9%. And not including Menands, of the 31 randomly selected villages, only 3 had money appropriated to pay the historian directly, separate from any administrative or office costs. So these were the only salaries that were listed in village budgets for historians. So on the right is then the percent of the total general fund appropriations that the salary accounted for. So now I will discuss the recommendations I came to based on the data I have shown you. So first recommendation is I recommend the village of Menands look into an agreement with the town of Colony in which the village would provide road salt while the town oversees the plowing of all of the streets in both the town and the village. So already the village plows one of the town's streets, so further consolidation is feasible, but under the oversight of the town. And the village and town should also look into consolidating park maintenance. The 2 municipalities pay similar rates per total square mile in the town, but by consolidating the service, the principle of an economy of scale may allow for further efficiency and cost reduction. The highway department in the 2 municipalities may also be an area for consolidation. And finally, the town pays significantly less for its justices per capita than Menands. Because municipal law requires that the village have both an elected and an appointed judge, there is a higher rate of judges per capita in Menands, and that corresponds to a higher price per capita. And if politically feasible, a future long-term goal may be further integration of the village and town court systems. The second recommendation I have is the village should investigate different opportunities for investing idle cash. As part of the village's next comprehensive plan, perhaps an emphasis should be placed on growing the village's fund balance, which in turn can increase the principal on which the village can earn interest. So the coterminous town village of Mount Kisco has been extremely successful with NY class for investing idle cash, but Menands would, based on the online calculator for NY class, Menands would have made less interest revenue, exclusively keeping their fund balance in NY class than the present arrangement, but there may be other options available to maximize that revenue. Thirdly, looking at the fire department, membership is certainly the most pressing issue facing the Menands Fire Company and by extension, the fire department. Before government operations were forced to be reevaluated due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the fire department was in the planning process for instating a junior firefighter program, a program which trains high schoolers and provides the benefits of membership starting at a young age, might be the boost Menands needs to fight the membership problem. So Menands should work with Colony on this program, incorporating all school districts in the area and keeping them together to foster a strong community. Finally, for the historian, our historian funding is better than most others. By my research, in other municipalities, historians' importance is de-emphasized, and the position is not given the funding it requires. While there's always more that can be done by historians with more funding, Menands is better than most other municipalities, which was something that I was extremely impressed by when I was doing my research. So I will now open the floor for any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. And yes, I feel free if you have any questions.
All right, Rebecca, I had a question.
Yes.
For the appropriations for the fire department, did that include bond payments for the fire truck, the chief's vehicles, and other equipment that we've bonded for?
It did not include payment on debts. It included just the budget item, like under the general fund appropriations for the fire department. So everything that is included there in the budget is taken into account, and that was the same budget codes and everything were used across all the villages to make sure the data was comparable. So it doesn't. I think there's a separate section of the budget for payment on debts. So it doesn't include that, but for all of the villages, it includes just the budget items under the fire department.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any more questions for Rebecca? Thank you, Rebecca. You did a great job. A lot of research.
Thank you.
There, great presentation.
Thank you.
And
All right.
we have Megan present. I just want people to know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. So if you want the whole report, let Don know, and he can get you a copy of that.
It's like 65 pages long, so I had to make some cuts for the report.
All right, so Megan, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm going to share my screen with you. Alrighty. Okay, can everybody see the presentation? Awesome. Okay, so hello, I'm Megan Ponton. I'm also a student at Cornell University ILR School, and my research focused primarily on economic and community development. So in terms of what I was focusing on, it was a comparative research project between Menands and other villages throughout New York State. So thank you so much for Trustee Harris, your help throughout this process, and also Mayor Grenier, thank you for the floor tonight and for the opportunity to share some of what I found this summer. So tonight I'll focus primarily on my recommendations. I also have quite a lengthy report that includes more about the findings as well as the specific recommendations. So if you're interested in those, please take a look. But the core elements that I've been focusing on were community development. So how do we strengthen the sense of community in the village, and also economic development. So how do we make Menands a place where local businesses not only want to enter the market, but they really thrive in this market as well. Okay, so some of the methods, qualitative on one side, quantitative on the other. So on the qualitative side, I had a lot of conversations with different officials ranging from mayors to DPW superintendents to Chamber of Commerce directors, tons of different types of people. I also used a lot of different web pages, whether that's a state website, a federal website, or just like a village or town website. And I also looked into some village codes. And on the quantitative side, I used a lot of databases, whether that's a state or an independent database. I also had a lot of correspondence with clerks in different villages, primarily about water and sewer rate data. Okay, so the five main pillars of my research within these two categories of community and economic development. And you can see kind of the subcategories that I focused on within each pillar, but the main ones were community engagement, building and code enforcement, public works, sustainability, and economic development. So in each of these categories, the idea kind of was, what are other villages doing and what's been successful for them? And then how can we implement those here in Menands? So I'll start with community engagement. My focus for this was primarily on Menands Youth Department and Seniors Department. And my first recommendation is to form a separate recreation commission to spearhead community activities for residents of all ages. So not just kids, not just seniors. In other villages, this has been really helpful in kind of pulling in that engagement from everybody in the village, regardless of their age. And oftentimes this is done on a volunteer basis. My second recommendation deals with the summer program. So currently, this is a half-day camp. This can be tricky for working parents. They might not have the ability to pick up their kids at noon, but offering an optional aftercare program that's either at a cost or staffed by volunteers for free will help provide some more of that flexibility in addition to the designated half-day offering. My third recommendation, much of the youth recreation programs currently in Menands deals with physical activity and athletics. So kind of cultivating the offerings that are not specifically those activity ones, but more related to arts, culture, education. In other communities, these have taken the form of things like book clubs, theater programs, clubs related to STEM, and those have all proved really valuable as well. The next one is, it can be a challenge to kind of engage youth across the spectrum. So including adolescents or teenagers can sometimes be a challenge. So focusing more attention on that specific population and engaging those students. In other villages, this has taken the form of like movie nights or specific driver intervention programs just to kind of provide adolescents with those skills that they need. Next, collaborating with nearby municipalities for large-scale event programming, whether that's a food drive, a clothing collection, a holiday celebration. This is really helpful because you can share up costs, divide up planning duties, and also execute a larger marketing campaign within those as well. And my last two recommendations for this department kind of work together. So any community service that happens in the village now is on more of an informal basis. So for example, if a student is looking to get some hours for NHS, they might volunteer at the summer park program. But establishing more of a structured program will help to make it a lot easier for residents to volunteer their time when they would like. So one potential idea is like a digital literacy program that matches up students, younger students that do have those digital skills, and pairing them up with older residents who might not have that same familiarity with technology. It's a great way to just kind of form bonds across the community while using the resources that exist here to kind of fuel it and help make life easier for the older population. And social media is a great way to do that, especially if the village wants to expand its presence on social media from kind of more old platforms like Facebook, or even the village website, to kind of expand those into platforms that younger populations are using, like Instagram and Twitter. So the next thing that I looked at was building and code enforcement. And what I was specifically interested here was how do villages kind of approach and divide the duties of planning and zoning? Are they shared by the village board? Are they joint with the town? I was really curious about things like that. So the data in this graph, they come from a sample of 34 different villages across the state, representing 29 counties and 9 of New York State's 10 regions. I excluded New York City for pretty obvious reasons. And each village selected in this sample has a population size that's pretty comparable to Menands, so somewhere in the range of 3,000 to 5,000 residents. You can see that most villages did have independent zoning boards of appeals, as is done in Menands. That was to be expected. And of course, each village had its own village board. That was also to be expected. But only in terms of the planning board, about 85.3 had independent planning boards. About 11.8% had combined this function with the town, and only about 3% of the villages had members of the village board execute planning duties, which is currently the way it's being done in Menands. So in terms of my recommendations for this department, the first would be to consider establishing an independent planning board. So other officials that I spoke with noted that the primary motivation behind this is a worry that trustees might not have the necessary background on things like seeker or site plan review. We know Menands officials have been trained in this through training sessions, but dividing up this responsibility would allow more residents to get involved in municipal operations and also kind of lighten the load for trustees as well. And that's a recommendation that was also present in the comprehensive plan, so I'm just kind of echoing that here. The second recommendation, to explore the resources and the membership opportunities provided by collaborative bodies like the New York State Building Officials Conference and the International Code Council. They offer opportunities to kind of learn from peers. They offer training resources, and officials in other municipalities have noted that those have been really helpful and really valuable. The next two kind of work together. They deal with the village website. So publicizing some more resources about planning and zoning, and also to allow for digital submission of like permits and form applications, license applications, because residents might not have that necessary background when they're filling out those forms. It can kind of help on the village's end to just kind of provide that some of that information up front and not have to deal with the backlog of questions as residents are submitting those. And the last deals with also the village website. This was an idea from the village of Homer. They actually have a report a problem button on their village website that allows residents to go in and say an issue or a complication that they're having, and the request actually stays up on the website until it's been fulfilled. So that just kind of helps encourage accountability and some transparency with village operations, and it also minimizes any possibility for duplication of multiple residents emailing the village about the same thing over and over. The next area I looked into was housing. So this summary table that's up on the slide here is from the same sample of 34 villages used earlier. So again, looking at villages with comparable population sizes to Menands. I explored a lot of different variables. More information about this is available in the report, as well as some regression modeling. But just two things I wanted to highlight about this data that's in the table here. The poverty rate in Menands was higher than the median of the sample, and also the number of one-unit detached structures, that's primarily single-family homes, was lower than the median in the sample. So I only have one recommendation for this department, and again, this recommendation was also present in the comprehensive plan, but to consider some rezoning to allow for the construction of more of these one-unit single-family homes, because this is an area where the village is currently lacking in terms of housing options and availability for residents. The next thing I looked at for the Public Works Department, I focused primarily on water and sewer rates for this department. So how do other municipalities structure their rates? Do they use increasing or decreasing block rate schedules? Do they use a uniform rate? Things like that. So the graph I have up on the screen here deals with how villages treat residential, commercial, and industrial customers. So in the village of Menands, there's a different rate structure for residential and commercial customers. I found that within the sample, and this is a different sample. This is a sample of 31 villages. Again, 9 of New York State's 10 regions, but this encompasses a greater variety of populations. But I found that only 38.7 distinguished in some way between residential, commercial, and industrial customers, whether that's different rates or billed a different number of times per year, but Menands was in the minority on that aspect. Next, I looked at water billing frequency. So how often are these bills being mailed out per year? So the most common scheme by far was a quarterly scheme, as you can see. Menands bills biannually, so that was the next common, and then monthly. And each of these kind of has their own benefits and drawbacks. Quarterly means bills need to be sent out more frequently, meters need to be read more frequently, but billing more frequently also kind of allows you to catch any leaks or possibility for damages, kind of nip those in the bud early on. So again, benefits and drawbacks to each. Next thing I looked at was the rate structures. So are they in terms of block rates, which basically means for any given range of quantity, there's a different rate. So I found that about 54.8% of villages in the sample used a block rate structure. And within this group, about 59% of these were increasing, which means that as you use more water, the rate you pay for water increases. And the remainder used a uniform rate. And just kind of more detail on this, I also looked into, do villages have a minimum bill or do they not have a minimum bill? And you can see the information on that here. About 64.5% of villages in the sample had a minimum bill of some kind, as Menands does. All right, so the report also includes a usage simulation that lists the yearly costs. So if a resident were to use 96,000 gallons of water in a given year, how much would that cost them? So I focused on residential customers. I standardized it with a standard 5/8-inch meter, and also the in-village rates as opposed to outside of village rates. And I found that the median for this was 535.33. Menands actually fell in below this median at 410.90. So basically, the takeaway here is that Menands residents do pay a very high minimum bill, but they get a lot of water for this price, which means that most residents don't have to go over that minimum threshold and pay the per unit rate. So when you're designing a water and sewer rate schedule, there's three kind of primary aspects to balance, and those are financial security, efficiency, and conservation, as you can see from this diagram. And the rate structure in Menands is currently more focused on efficiency and financial security. So the biannual billing cycle means meters don't need to be read super frequently, bills don't need to be mailed out super frequently. That kind of helps to streamline processes and make it more efficient. And the really high minimum usage also means that the village kind of has a pretty good idea of the revenue they can be expecting without having to spend a lot of time and money forecasting what use might be if it was on a block rate schedule. But a weakness of the current system is conservation. So given that the minimum usage is so high and the rate per 1,000 gallons, at least for residential customers, is constant, there's little to no incentive to use less water and focus on those conservation efforts. And for commercial customers in the village, there's a block rate model in place that actually rewards with lower rates the users who are increasing their consumption. And so my recommendations for this department are as follows. So the first two kind of work together, using a staggered schedule for residential and commercial customers, kind of motivate both groups to keep that usage low. Again, this must be balanced against the risk of heightened financial uncertainty, but it's just kind of the village needs to decide where their primary values lie. Is it more about conservation or more about that security? And this applies to both residential and consumer customers. And next, to devise a rotating schedule for equipment replacement. This can be a major expense in a lot of small communities that I spoke with, but replacing equipment on that fixed schedule kind of minimizes the possibility for unforeseen expenses and also helps ensure the safety of employees by making sure that equipment is replaced when it needs to be replaced on a fixed schedule. And the last recommendation for this department is to consider forming either a beautification committee, a tree board, or a parks commission of some kind. This is a really common practice in other villages. Just kind of helps with upkeep and help make sure the physical landscape of the village is enhanced. And it also allows residents to kind of get involved with operations a bit more and take a bit more pride in the community as well. So the next thing I looked into was sustainability. And in the report, you'll find a list of federal and state initiatives regarding sustainability that Menands might be interested in engaging with. But I also looked into best practices, and those best practices are kind of reflected in the recommendations I've made here. So the first was to initiate a community garden. This is something that a lot of other villages or towns have done, either to cultivate produce for residents' own use or to cultivate produce and then donate it to needy families in the area. This is important not only to kind of decrease reliance on large-scale agriculture, but also just kind of give residents a bit more insight into where their food is coming from. That's really important too. The second one, so the town of Colony has a yard waste composting option currently. And I think it would be a good idea for Menands to kind of expand this into a composting program for food scraps, which doesn't currently exist in the village, just kind of in an effort to continue minimizing that waste impact. The next is to develop an energy benchmarking system. This is also a common practice in a lot of other villages, just kind of recording and keeping track of energy usage, publicizing that to residents, and also using that information to compare either with similar buildings within the municipality or similar municipalities in other parts of the state. Again, just kind of helping to build that accountability, and also keeping track of energy efficiency over time is really important. The next would be to consider a transition to LED streetlights. These are great for long-term cost savings. They also help decrease energy usage. The next one is to institute some kind of task force or committee focused on sustainability. Much of the 2020 comprehensive plan has recommendations about how the village might become more sustainable. So, for example, provisions about green infrastructure or the Climate Smart Communities program. But instituting a task force to kind of make sure that those goals are being implemented and work towards would also be very valuable for the village. And the last one is just to kind of consider putting in some programs to enhance community walkability. This has been really valuable in a lot of other villages, primarily the village of Williamsville. They've really branded themselves on this walkability aspect. So expanding sidewalks, green spaces, just kind of make sure that community members can kind of get around the village easier and also decrease their reliance on vehicles as well. All right, so the next thing I looked at was economic development, and I focused primarily on the organizations that kind of govern economic development. So the first thing I looked at was chambers of commerce. So these are uniting business ventures in a community, provide opportunities for networking, professional development, sometimes collective marketing campaigns. Sometimes they're on a small level, so the level of a village or a town. Other times they might be on a really large scale, such as a county or even an entire region. I also looked at local business alliances. So these typically focus on a more narrow community and work primarily on marketing efforts to kind of promote businesses in a small community. I also looked at local development corporations. There's some more information on those here. These are private, not-for-profit. They're separate from the municipalities they work alongside, but they help communities draw upon existing resources and find the most beneficial uses for them. So the town of Colony, for example, has a local development corporation of its own. And you can see from the graphs that the Mid-Hudson region kind of leads the state in the number of LDCs. Capital Region comes in third place, and then within the Capital Region, Albany County has the most. So that's really great for Menands because that means that there's a lot of different opportunities for collaboration and partnership with some of these organizations to bring positive change for Menands. I also looked at industrial development agencies. These are, as you can see, leading in the Capital Region, and within the Capital Region, Albany actually leads. So again, lots of opportunities for collaboration. And these primarily focus on offering tax incentives, opportunities for investment, workforce development programs, things like that. So in terms of my recommendations for economic development, the first would be to really encourage Menands businesses to assemble either into a chamber of commerce that's focused specifically on the village instead of the one that we are involved with the town of Colony, or a local business alliance, and also to develop a distinct community brand. So this is something that's been really helpful in other communities. The village of Hamilton is a great example, creating a slogan, creating like a comprehensive theme on all media outlets, just kind of help convey to outsiders what the village truly is, and also convey to residents that sense of this is our community and let's be really proud of it. The next would be to institute some kind of support system or a networking group for village entrepreneurs or potential business owners. as well as a Menands specific workforce development program. And these are both things that can be done by working closely with the IDA in the town of Colony, the LDC in the town of Colony, or the IDA of Albany County. The next would be to develop a Business of the Month feature on Menands social media outlets. Just kind of continue showing village businesses that the village board is committed to their success. I know the Menands Business Breakfast is kind of a great way to get that conversation started, but just continuing to display that commitment is really important to kind of foster that positive relationship. The next would be to modify the village website to add some section to show shovel-ready properties. This is something that the village of Cobleskill has done and found really valuable. Just kind of offering up those properties that are ready for development, and also information like traffic counts, foot counts, water and sewer fees. Saves a lot of time and money and stress on the developer's end when they can have all that information readily available, so they don't have to go out and seek it for themselves. The next would be, this is difficult to implement at the moment because of COVID safety precautions, but when things do start to clear up, focusing on special events has proved really instrumental in developing a lot of other local economies. For example, we talked with the Village of Lake George mayor and the Village of Lake Placid mayor. They've both discussed the importance of special events, and in the report you'll find a list of some potential special events that have worked in other villages that might be valuable for Menands as well. And these are really great for driving residents in the community as well as outside of the community to local businesses and kind of stimulating that activity there as well. And the last recommendation I had was regarding tax incentives. So currently the village has a tax abatement program to kind of bring businesses into the village. But in terms of encouraging them to stay and to stay updated, one idea is a tax incentive for facade or storefront updates, just to kind of keep the Broadway corridor looking nice, and also know that businesses in the village are valued here. And in the report, you'll also find a list of potential grant funding opportunities, whether that's on the state level, the federal level, or offered by an independent organization. And I've also included a list of some funding resources and other just kind of support programs for local businesses. So that is all I have for you today for this presentation. So thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to answer any questions now. If anything arises after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to me via email or LinkedIn. I'm also very responsive to that. But yeah, does anybody have any questions at the moment?
I didn't have any questions, but just want to thank you for your in-depth research that you did. It's very helpful and a lot of good points and a lot of things for the board to start thinking about. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic, and certainly some of the recommendations are things that maybe the board can look at this fall, because I think they're awesome.
Thank you.
So nobody has any questions for Megan. I'll turn the floor over to Brian, who can introduce his interns and the focus of their research.
Sure. So thanks. What's interesting is we Seth and I started out this project kind of understanding where we were going to go with it or wanted to go with it, and so picking up from what Rebecca did, just as a total coincidence, we looked at how we can, as a village, form a longer-term plan to enhance our reserve fund over the next 10 years. And so basically what I tasked the team to do is to look at some different scenarios with economics and village finances, using history as the backstop. And it was a really interesting experiment, and we tried a bunch of things. So I'll turn it over to the team to give you what this all resulted in. So
sounds great. Thanks, Brian. Do you want me to share my screen? Would that be the best way to do it?
Sure. Yeah. If you can do it. Yeah.
Cool. Let me find the best way. Okay. So can you guys see it?
Yes.
Good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks for that introduction, Brian. Me and Natalie have been working closely with Brian to develop financial forecasting for Menands and figuring out the best ways to balance its budget going forward. And specifically, we created a 10-year model or plan that we think could be implemented effectively in a couple ways that we think could go about doing it. Yeah, so thank you all for your time and get started. So the first thing that we wanted to do was benchmark our budget with similar municipalities. So really similar to what Megan and Rebecca did, we took around 25 or 30 other New York State municipalities that had similar population sizes as well as were comparable in geography. And we ended up pulling around 25 or so of their budgets, and trying to benchmark them proved really, really difficult actually, because there's no real standard we found to look at your data financially across municipalities. For example, Menands has the fire department and the police, and a lot of other municipalities don't have that, and it's handled by New York State. Similarly, we separate our sewer and water budget, whereas a lot of municipalities put it in the general fund. So we found it was extremely difficult to compare the municipalities, but there were a number of qualitative factors that we'll get into shortly that we found that we could make use of for Menands.
So instead of comparing our budget to other budgets, we decided to focus on the historical data we had for Menands and generate some kind of 10-year plan, like Wes mentioned, that included analyzing various financial projections and choosing a plan that was reasonable as well as achievable for the village, given the historical data.
Yeah, and then based on that 10-year plan, what we wanted to do was come up with some sort of way that Menands can be more conscious of where its current state of the budget is standing. So we are recommending that Menands implement, instead of usually in the past, it's been a deep dive yearly review of the budget, more towards when we're looking towards how we're going to shape the next year's budget. But we've decided that if we tried to use it more on a quarterly basis, then it would be beneficial for everyone, because we could understand if there are changes in revenues and expenses and taxable assessments, for example, that are changing, and we can be a little bit more proactive as opposed to being reactive, to kind of align with the 10-year plan and stay on track to have a balanced and sustainable budget. So like I said, a lot of the qualitative factors that we had, mainly through talking with other village treasurers, one of the main benchmarks that we were looking at was how often they reported their financials to their boards and in what format. So we kind of found that there really is no standardization across financial reporting among the different villages. So some villages will report monthly, some quarterly, and some yearly. So there are certain things that work for other villages that don't work as well for others, and we tried to pick and choose what we thought might be the best things for us. So we found that most use a municipal accounting software called Williamson Law, and one village even said that the software had been in place since pre-Y2K. So definitely some probably room for updating. We actually use a different platform called KVS, and only one other municipality that we found also uses KVS, but it's the next generation. So potentially there's room to update that software and make our accounting a little bit more advanced, but that's just something to keep in the back of our minds. But the main recommendation that came from these discussions was that some municipalities report their financial data and are a little bit more transparent. So that's something that we could implement across the board.
So for our financial model for Menands, we played around with doing 5 versus 10-year budget plans, but we found that a 10-year plan was a bit more of a realistic timeline, considering how economic cycles flow over time. So we looked at the past couple years' expenses, revenue, and growth trends, and kind of played around with the numbers to find some constants to use for the model that were a good average based on the historical data, as well as considering various factors that will come into play with any budget. Okay, so part of our assumptions that I mentioned, what we decided to make constant was we decided to focus on things that Menands could contribute towards. So we know that there's a lot of potential growth in Menands, especially on the Broadway corridor, as well as new real estate ventures or updating current real estate spaces. And so we decided to use a 2% yearly increase of assessed property value as one of our constants. And we decided to assume all other revenue, such as state aid, not non-property taxes, and different funding as constant. And we compared that to capping a budget increase of 2.5% per year, but excluding debt service. So debt service is what we were assuming to maintain constant through the budget increase. And that's the biggest thing Menands can do for the budget is take a hard look at it, control certain expenses, take a look at ones that are growing more than 2.5% per year, and see what they can do to kind of cut some unnecessary spending. However, COVID has definitely impacted spending, but it has also impacted revenue as well. And one of the biggest thing that Menands can do is set the yearly property tax increase. So I know that New York State tries to cap municipalities from increasing it more than 2 or 2.5% per year. But with playing around with the different numbers, we found that that low of an increase is really hard to keep the budget on track over time. So we decided to go with a 3% property tax increase. And we played around with other budget increase growths, other property value growths, but this is where we found there was a good happy medium, and Wes can talk more about how we decided these numbers.
Yeah, so we mainly use historical data from 2014 to 2020. The property tax rate from that time period had an average yearly increase of 3%, so pretty in line with our assumptions. Taxable assessments have had an average yearly increase of 0.07%, but this number is trending upwards. So basically from 2014 to 2018, it was very stagnant, and that's largely because of the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Real estate was really struggling, but last year it rose 1%, and the year before it rose 0.5%. So we found that 2% would be a realistic estimate, considering that the trend is upwards and there's a sizable growth opportunity within the Broadway corridor. And then in terms of expenses, we had an average yearly increase of 0.16% from 2014 to 2020. But with expectations of COVID, we imagine that expenses are going to increase much more than that. So that's where that 2.5% expense increase comes from. And similarly, there are a lot of labor contract expenses that are guaranteed that we wanted to account for. For example, with the police and DPW, that their contracts for their salaries and their health benefits and things like that increased by 2.5% each year. So we found that this 0.16 was a little bit low. And as a result, our model was a little bit more conservative, considering the uncertainty of how much expenses could increase. But we think that's a beneficial thing.
So this graph kind of shows the overall 10-year plan, including our current budget. So color coordinated, the yellow bars are our anticipated revenue for the future years, as well as the anticipated expenditure. So those are with the revenue of the 3% increase of property tax and the 2% assessed property value increase per year, as well as the 2.5% budget increase per year, excluding debt service. This line represents the deficit between our revenue and our expenditure. And our current deficit is $675,000. So that is kind of a big start. The axis for the deficit is on the right side of the graph. And over time, with the increase in property tax and the hopeful increase of assessed property value, we can decrease this deficit from 675 to around $440,000. So that is something that you have to work slowly towards to achieve, but it is achievable. And as we said, we do have a bit more of a conservative estimate. So depending on how the actual budgets compare to our projections, there's room for even more growth per year to help decrease the deficit. So this shows specifically the deficit decreasing each year compared to the additional money that is getting made to decrease that deficit. So the yellow bars show how much is going towards reducing that expenditure and revenue deficit to reduce it down from $675,000. And then the gray line is the actual negative deficit. Even though it is a negative number, it's portrayed as, I know you guys understand that the deficit means we're at a loss of money, but I want to demonstrate that it is decreasing over time. And this shows the cumulative growth that we would be putting back into the reserve fund if you think about it that way. So the first year, it's already decreasing the deficit by about $5,000. By the fifth year, the cumulative decrease or money that would have been put towards the reserve is $60,000. And by the end of the 10 years, we have about $233,000 that is working towards slowly reducing the deficit in the budget.
Yeah, so basically in simple terms, this year we operated at a $675,000 deficit, which obviously isn't sustainable as we continue to dip into the reserve fund. And if the deficit were to be consistent or even rise, then Menands' budget will never be balanced, and that's just not a sustainable way to operate. So with this plan, with accounting for the increases in expenses, as well as assuming that we increase taxable assessments by a certain amount, as well as the tax rate by a certain amount, then we can gradually start dipping away at this deficit.
So overall, with researching and coming into contact with other municipalities about their financial reporting, we found that the impacts of the COVID pandemic was the biggest worry for finances across all the villages that we were able to speak to. And I know Wes spoke to this earlier, but though we tried to compare Menands' budgets to similar villages in New York State, it was really impossible because the way villages reported information differed from each other, as well as from how they were reported in the New York State Controller Office, which was kind of alarming to us because we were hoping to use that as a standardized measure of budget expenditure and revenue, and we weren't able to do that. For some of the villages that we were able to talk to for their regular reporting, a lot of them use that to pre-approve large budget items and compare where they were at with their spendings with where they plan to be in their budget at that point in the year. Quite a few had monthly information given to the board at one of the board meetings, and then the other board meeting would be used to pre-approve big spending. But very few villages had a long-term financial plan, but it seemed like they were thinking about it considering the circumstances of how the pandemic affected them.
So I touched on this earlier, but we recommend that Menands starts reporting quarterly because like I mentioned earlier, the deficit just isn't sustainable. And by reporting quarterly, the financials in the budget can be more transparent, and you guys can recognize when there are changes in expenses or changes in taxable assessments, and adjust the tax rate accordingly based on that. And by reporting a little bit more frequently, then the deficit can be chipped away, because we'll be able to recognize where those anomalies arise, as well as try to develop solutions to mitigate such problems. But yeah, ultimately that will just try to cut the deficit and make the budget more sustainable and balanced. So with the help of the village treasurer, we identified a form that we can use to report this financial data on a more frequent basis.
So this slide has a link to the full PDF report that Bill was able to create for us using the software we currently use. This is a really great show of where expenses are. One of the things that we would recommend that the village adds to these quarterly reports is, besides expenditure, the revenue that is made, because even though certain revenue is only acquired at certain points in the year, just knowing where you're at with the more regularly submitted revenue, as well as seeing where you are potentially losing money, such as people reassessing property value and the village thus losing overall property value. Seeing where there's a loss of money in revenue allows the village to maybe adjust future expenditure to balance out those changes in the budget when it comes to the real time compared to the plan.
Yeah, so overall, this has been a really interesting experience just to get exposure to what local government is like and how municipalities operate. And it's definitely given me an appreciation for things that go on in my community that I didn't necessarily know how these benefits were sourced and where all the work that goes into enjoying them. But yeah, it's definitely given me an appreciation, as well as some practical knowledge into how budgets are operated and balanced, and how to properly build these budgets going forward.
I agree. I really enjoyed this experience. Brian was a really great resource throughout it. And though he is a trustee on the board, he has a lot of private professional experience that I'm sure Wes can agree was very informative and a different perspective than what either of us had had so far. I really enjoyed being able to do financial projections and take a hard look at financial reporting and what is important, because municipalities are just a large or small business in a way. So you have to view it as the fact of all the public resources that they provide, as well as just making sure that they have a sustainable plan for future operation. And it was really interesting to learn about, because I know my town doesn't have a board, but it is something that is a transferable lesson to other environments.
Yeah, so thank you all for your time and for listening. I know it's been a longer board meeting than probably would have hoped for, but yeah, we appreciate it. If you have any questions for us, we'd be happy to field them.
Well, this has been great again for Natalie and Wes. So much valued information that you put together, and all four of you did a phenomenal job. Much more than the years that you are in college right now, that you did great research, and we're very appreciative of it.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
Very informative. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Good job.
And some of us have been, I mean, I've been a trustee for 7 years, and I learned something from your research, a lot from it. And I mean, Meg has been on the board longer than any of us, and I'm sure she has. We all have. So thank you for opening our eyes to all of these, to all this information and to all these great ideas.
So Brian, Seth, and every single one of you interns can do this.
Yeah.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
Seth, thank you for bringing this idea to the board, and then bringing Brian on board to the two of you to collaborate on it and get the interns, and selecting 4 instead of 1 like we had originally planned on. It was a great project, and thank you all.
Yeah.
Good luck to all of you.
Yeah, definitely.
And I have to say, it was truly my pleasure. It was more work than I thought I was going to do this summer, but it was well worth it. And both getting to know the interns and watching the project really take shape. As Meg said, it went from getting one intern to taking on 4, and it just kept expanding. And I'm glad that it did, because the more it expanded, the more exciting and interesting it was. So I hope that our interns not only gain an appreciation for local government, but maybe they'll go into local government at some point. And certainly, I'm sure if we ever had room in Menands, we would gladly take.
But if any of you ever need references, you know where to find us.
That's right. That's right. We'd be happy to. So thanks, guys. Congratulations, and a job well done. You all deserve to celebrate tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good
Good
luck
at the school night.
school year.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was great. Did anybody on the board have anything else to move forward? We do have one matter for executive session, but did anybody else have anything else they wanted to talk about before we do that?
No,
Nope.
I don't.
Going
All
one.
right. Thank you again to the interns and for everyone joining us tonight. And if someone could make a motion to enter into executive session for a personnel matter.
So moved.
Second.
I move to enter executive session for a personnel matter.
All in favor?
Aye.
Both. All right, Renee,
All right.
we're not going to be coming back out to vote on anything, so
All right, thank you, guys.
sign off, and you won't need to wait for me to bring you back on.
Okay, sounds good. Good night, everyone.
All right,
Bye.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you guys so much.
Wes, we'll see you later. See you, Natalie.
See ya.
Mike McKay is joining us, so he didn't hang up yet.
I'm here.
I see you. In the dark, I see you.
Let me get a light on.
All right, Don, can you stop recording?